we wanted to talk about a language tip today, and the tip for today is talking about tacting and how we can encourage our kids to tact. We have to understand what tacting is. We talk a lot on the show about manding. Manding is when they request something, right? We have to teach manding before we can teach tacting. It just goes in that progression. So when, we want for the child to know the label for this and to be able to request it if they want a pen. Usually we're going to start with things that are their absolute favorite things. If the child loves cookies, we're going to teach them the sign or the gesture or pointing or the word that goes with cookie, or the picture that they can point to that goes with cookie, so that they can request the cookie. Once we've gotten manding so that it's happening hundreds of times a day, then we're going to hopefully move on to tacting. I think a lot of times people get confused with labeling and tacting, because labeling is something that we teach as we're manding and as we're getting ready to tact, but tacting and labeling are slightly different. We want for our child to know the words or the signs or to point to the picture when referring to different things. But tacting is when you are including somebody else in your discovery of the thing. So it's when you see something new and novel and you point it out. My husband and I always talk about when my belly was large with my child in it, we were at a strip mall and coming down into the parking lot into it, and they were having a furniture tent sale and there were balloons everywhere. And I turned, and lovely little couple moment, I turned and I said to my husband, oh, well, in like a year and a half, we're going to be coming into the same parking lot and there's going to be somebody in the back seat who's going to say balloon, right? When they see the balloons. Well, that is tacting. When a child sees something and they point or they gesture or they say the word to express what it is. And that they have noticed it. Now, this is an important skill in language that we want our children to have, because it's going to help us get to the point where we get to conversation. It really is the beginning of conversation, because they're not just randomly walking through a room and saying, camera, monitor, clock, for the purpose of doing those. They're pointing to it as part of the beginning of a conversation. They're saying balloon because they want mommy or daddy to notice that there's a balloon, which is part of that joint attention that we talk about all the time, a really important milestone that a lot of our kids on the spectrum miss. They just miss it altogether. That moment in time when I'm looking at something and the child is looking at something and the child looks at me to see what is my reaction to it. And I look at the child and go, oh, it's cool or it's not cool, whatever it is. And we're having a conversation. It's not full of words, but we're both looking, if we're at the zoo and we're looking at the giraffe. Oh, look at the giraffe, and we're noticing each other's reactions to it. So important, this triangle of attention, looking at each other, looking at that thing. It's the beginning of conversation. It's the beginning of empathy. It's the beginning of cognition that allows us to take perspective for other people. And that is sorely missing in our kids with autism. So as soon as we can get to that, we're going to start to get caught up. So we really want to see tacting. And again, tacting is that thing of, so much of the time when we go to that attention, it's because there's something that we want to call attention to that's tacting. So we want to teach tacting. It's hard to teach tacting because it's something that's supposed to happen organically. And it's really hard to prompt, because once we're saying, look at the balloon, now the child isn't looking at the balloon, right? They didn't discover it on their own. So in a sense, it isn't really tacting. We call that an impure tact, because if we're having to point it out, then it isn't truly tacting, because tacting truly, a pure tact, is when the child notices it on their own and calls it into attention themselves. But in order to teach tacting, we're going to have to do impure tacts. So how on earth do we start to do that? And of course, we start with labeling so that the child knows what it is, either the gesture, the sign, or pointing to it in a picture that they know, okay, this goes with this. So if it is, a ball, we've already taught the child to label it and say ball, or to sign for ball, which I think is this, or point to the picture and understand this is the same as that. Okay, now we have to set up circumstances in which we're gonna be doing something, and somehow the ball is gonna become new and novel in the room. And a lot of times we'll be in cahoots with somebody else, and we're gonna start by prompting for the child and reinforcing when the child does notice something that's new and novel in the room. So for instance, mom and dad might be sitting in the living room. We've already worked on ball. We know that the child knows the label for ball, whether it's vocal or otherwise. Mom and the child are sitting in the room. Dad's in the other room, and dad has the beach ball so that nobody gets hurt. And dad throws the beach ball into the room where he can't be seen, but the ball comes careening into the room. And mom looks at the ball, and depending on where we are with teaching this to the child, the mom might have an extra big reaction and go, oh, and point to the ball and even say ball, right? In hopes that the child now looks at the ball and they prompt the child to say ball or make the sign for ball. Again, it's an impure tact, but if we're doing it hundreds of times within a week, at some point, we're now going to try to fade the prompt and have something happen in the room, and it won't always be a ball, right? Sometimes it'll be something else, but something come into the room, and the child has already seen how exciting it is when mom notices it and brings it to their attention, so hopefully they're going to now bring it to our attention. And when the child does tact and does a pure tact, we need to reinforce that, because in the beginning the child isn't going to do it, and then the child is going to do it sparingly. And when you've set up these circumstances where you're prompting it and creating these circumstances, right, because you're really making some crazy circumstances for something new and novel to come in, you're having to think it through, right, and create a circumstance where it's going to be big enough that the child's going to go, oh, this thing just came in. You have to make absolute sure that you are prepared to reinforce like crazy that tacting, because we don't get a lot of opportunities in the beginning to reward and reinforce tacting. So you have to have something ready that is actually reinforcing to the child, and make sure that it's big reinforcement for it. Then as you go along, you're going to work on a whole bunch of things, and you'll work on this in a sensory way so that it's not just seeing something. But I can remember them asking us to burn popcorn in the microwave and to say nothing about it, in hopes that our son would say, something's burning, right? Or to say popcorn, whatever it is that he's smelling it, and calling it to somebody else's attention, and then reinforce it heavily. It's hard. Tacting is hard. I love skills for this because it gives us teaching points, and it gives us suggestions, and it gives us exemplars so that we don't have to make it up for ourselves. A really important thing. So tacting, know the term, understand what it is, and if your child does it, reinforce. And until your child does it, find ways to set that example and model it and prompt it so that they see, oh, this is what we do, and that it's really fun when somebody points something out. If you're going to the park and you see a dog, that you dog, and that you tickle your child or whatever, get them to notice, get them to make the sign for it, get them to label it. Yep, it's not tacting, but if you do that often enough, at some point they make the leap. Make sure you reinforce it as soon as it happens. Okay, that's tacting. Let's take a break and we'll be back in a minute. Hi, I'm here today with Cecilia Knight, who is the Director of Training for the Center for Autism and Related Disorders. And she's going to talk to us about something that I'm not entirely clear on, tacting. Tacting is when you make a comment on the environment, and then another person may reinforce that with non-specific reinforcement. Can you explain to me what the difference between a tacting program is and an expressive labeling program?
In an expressive labeling program, typically the therapist holds up a card, maybe with a turkey on it. Mm-hmm. And the therapist would say, "What is this?" referencing the picture. Mm-hmm. And the child would respond, "Turkey." The child is labeling the item. Mm-hmm. With a tact, it's a comment on the environment. So it can be evoked by a smell. So if I walk into the house and I smell Thanksgiving dinner, I can say, turkey. Or if I hear gobble, 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 I can say, that's a turkey. So it's a comment on the environment, which is different than just naming the item.
How do you get a child to comment on the environment? That's got to be hard.
It is. We use different prompts. Most of the time we use vocal prompts. For example, we may look through a book and point to the picture of an item and say, "Oh, look, it's Nemo." Say, "Nemo," and then reinforce the child for responding. Or we may say, "What do you see?" Say, "Nemo." And then eventually we would want to fade our point away. So I may say, "Look, Nemo." And then the child is referencing that and then also saying, "That's right, I see Nemo." And then later fading completely away so the picture of Nemo itself evokes the comment. If we're working on something auditory, maybe we have a cow on the table and we play the environmental sound in front of them, maybe give them a vocal prompt to say, "It's a cow," and the child may say, "It's a cow." And then we might fade the visual of the cow and they just hear the sound. And we prompt them by saying, say, "It's a cow," or "I hear a cow," and then eventually fade until the sound itself evokes the comment. The goal is to get towards spontaneous tacting, where the child can walk around and comment on the novel things in the environment that he hears or sees. And so that's a great way to sort of bridge to that point. Tacting is really important to get to higher level lessons of interverbal behavior. Commenting on things that are private events or commenting on things that I can't see that you're feeling, like your stomach hurts. But it's important to have those tacts in place so you can get to those later programs.